It began on a warm afternoon when the sunlight felt almost too calm for what was about to unfold. The kind of day where the air carried laughter from somewhere nearby, but couldn't wash away the tension that was quietly building. People would later talk about the moment as if it had been scripted, about how one man, tall, composed, his deep brown skin catching the fading light, stood in the center of it all, while a crowd circled with curious eyes and unspoken judgment. They didn't know his name then, and most didn't care to ask, but their assumptions about who he was and why he was there would ignite a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. I won't tell you yet what he carried in his hand or why it mattered, but I will tell you this. What started as a simple gathering would turn into a story that shattered reputations, rewrote rules, and exposed truths some people wished had stayed buried. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why his story had to be told. The afternoon sun poured a golden light over Brookside's Maple Court, where white canopies draped with garlands of ivory roses framed an immaculate lawn. A gentle breeze carried the soft melody of a string quartet, weaving through the laughter of well-dressed guests as servers in crisp uniforms glided between tables with trays of sparkling champagne. It was Maya Johnson's wedding day, and every detail bore her careful touch, subtle, elegant, intentional. Ethan Carter, her groom, stood near the arch at the edge of the lawn, greeting family members who had traveled from as far as Chicago and Atlanta. In this quiet, picturesque neighborhood, the air should have been filled only with the warmth of celebration. But at the far end of the cul-de-sac, just beyond the delicate white ribbons marking the event's boundary, Gregory Langford stood with his arms folded across his chest, eyes narrowed into hard slits. He had been watching since the catering vans arrived that morning, his face twisted into a scowl that deepened with each arrival of another guest. His pale polo shirt clung slightly to his frame in the August heat, but his posture carried the stiffness of a man certain he was guarding something. His version of order, his version of standards. The trigger came when little Amaya, Maya's niece and the flower girl, darted past him to pick up a loose ribbon that had fluttered into the street. Gregory's voice sliced through the music like a whip. "Get this trash out of here," he barked, his words sharp enough to make the nearby conversation falter. Before anyone could react, he strode forward, snatched the bouquet from the child's hands, and flung it into the gutter with a deliberate flick. Amaya froze, confusion clouding her small face, before she bolted back toward the safety of her parents. Several heads turned sharply, whispers rippling through the crowd. Maya, who had been speaking with her aunt, caught the movement from the corner of her eye and excused herself with quiet poise. She approached Gregory with the calm stride of someone who had dealt with this man before. "Mr. Langford," she said evenly, "is there something wrong?" His response came like a match to gasoline. "Is there something wrong? You've turned my street into a circus. This ghetto block party doesn't belong here. I should call immigration on every last one of you." The venom in his tone made nearby guests stiffen. Ethan moved toward them, his jaw tight, but Maya's raised hand stopped him. Gregory's voice carried over the neatly arranged tables as he gestured to the servers. "Noise, litter, cars blocking the road. It's disgusting. You people think you can just take over a quiet neighborhood like this? Not while I'm breathing." He stepped toward the champagne table, tipped it with both hands, and the crystal flutes cascaded to the ground, shattering in an explosion of glass and fizz. The quartet stopped mid-phrase. Gasps and sharp intakes of breath swept the reception area. A few phones were already out, recording. Some guests turned their backs, unwilling to fuel the confrontation, while others, especially the younger ones, raised their cameras higher. Among them, Maya's cousin Tyrell muttered to his friend, "This is going online right now," as he opened his livestream app. Within minutes, viewers began popping in. First a dozen, then 20, then more. Across the street, two teenage girls, not part of the wedding, leaned over the fence, phones angled to catch every second. Gregory's voice grew louder, feeding off the attention. "I pay more in property taxes than half the people here make in a year. And now my neighborhood's going to be trashed by some big, loud, drunken mess? Not happening." Maya's gaze never wavered, her voice still low and measured. "This is my wedding day, Mr. Langford. We've secured all the necessary permits, and this event is," he cut her off, stepping back toward his driveway, pulling out his phone. "Yeah, 911? I need police here immediately. We've got illegal activity at 112 Maple Court. Loud music, public drinking, probably drugs. They're not from here. They're urban." His words dripped with the same poison that had been staining his voice from the start. "Emergency situation on Maple Court," he announced to his 63 followers. His voice pitched higher than normal, the calculated edge of outrage sharpening each word. "We've got an illegal gathering, blocking traffic, loud music, public drinking. If you care about our property values, you need to come outside and witness this before it's too late." He panned his camera across the reception, capturing servers carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, the glint of champagne flutes, and the uneasy expressions of guests trying to maintain dignity under the scrutiny. "Look at this," he hissed. "Our quiet street turned into a ghetto block party. If we don't take a stand now, what's next?" 2 houses down, a garage door rumbled open, and Mr. Reynolds stepped out, squinting into the light, his phone already in hand. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson peeked through her blinds before stepping onto her porch with a disapproving shake of her head, though it was unclear whether her frown was for Gregory or the wedding. Gregory, sensing potential reinforcement, waved her over like a general summoning troops. "You see what I'm talking about? This is an invasion." She hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the bride and groom, but Gregory was already back on camera, turning to his followers. "This isn't about race, this is about standards. We have rules here in Brookside for a reason." Meanwhile, Tyrell's Instagram Live had gone from 43 viewers to 287 in under 10 minutes. His chat scrolled so fast he could barely read it. "Who is this guy? Hope the bride sues him. Get his name. This is going viral." 2 teens on the far side of the street switched to TikTok, hashtagging their clip #BrookesideWedding, adding trending audio for effect. Within moments, their video hit the For You page of dozens of local users, and the comments turned the unfolding confrontation into a digital spectacle. Screenshots of Gregory's flushed, angry face began circulating alongside captions like "Male Karen strikes again," and "Imagine ruining a wedding you weren't invited to." Gregory, oblivious to the online storm he was fueling, tapped out a series of messages in the app's group chat. "All residents, come out and record. They've blocked half the street with their cars. Loudspeakers, drinking in public. This isn't a backyard barbecue. This is a violation of our bylaws. We need to document everything for the HOA." A few neighbors responded with "On my way" or "Already watching," while others posted skeptical replies. "Isn't this a wedding?" and "Greg, you might be overreacting." He ignored the latter entirely. Maya stood a few feet away, keeping her posture composed, though she could feel the tension pressing against her like an invisible wall. Ethan leaned in just enough to murmur, "He's not going to stop until the police get here." She gave the slightest nod, her eyes following Gregory's movements without giving him the satisfaction of direct engagement. The servers continued their work with quiet professionalism, weaving through clusters of guests who whispered in low tones, their gazes flicking from the couple to the neighbor pacing on his driveway. Gregory abruptly turned his phone toward Maya, zooming in. There she is, the so-called bride, pretending she's entitled to disrupt our entire neighborhood for her personal party. "Let's see those permits she claims to have." His voice carried, and a few guests shifted uncomfortably. Tyrell's camera caught the moment perfectly, the sneer curling on Gregory's lips, the disapproval etched into his furrowed brow. The live chat exploded. "Oh, he's done for." Someone tagged the news station. "Call the mayor's office." The phrase, "protecting our property values," became his rallying cry as he launched into another monologue for the camera. "When my wife and I bought this home 20 years ago, we knew we were investing in peace and quiet, not chaos. This kind of thing brings crime, lowers standards, and drives good families away." Across the street, the Rodriguez kids snickered as they recorded him from behind a hedge, whispering commentary into their mics. They layered in sarcastic hashtags, #peace and quiet except me yelling, #standards for some, The sound of notifications began to erupt from multiple pockets and handbags as people realized the confrontation was already trending locally. Guests exchanged glances, some debating whether to intervene or simply let Gregory dig his own hole deeper. The sirens were louder now, the Doppler shift giving a sense of inevitability to the moment. Gregory, mistaking the sound for vindication, grinned at his camera. "Hear that? Law and order on the way. We'll see how long they keep this little stunt going once the uniforms arrive." But for every neighbor who peered out of their front door in solidarity with Gregory, another emerged filming him, not the wedding. "Mrs. Caldwell from the corner lot shouted, 'Greg, maybe let them be. It's a wedding, not a rave.' He waved her off like swatting a fly, muttering into his phone, 'Some people don't understand the importance of protecting investments.'" His group chat pinged with a new message. "Greg, think about what you're saying. People are recording this." He typed back without hesitation, "Good. I want them to see what's happening to our neighborhood." Gregory straightened his posture, his phone held high to capture what he assumed would be the vindication of his complaints, his expression one of barely contained triumph. The first patrol car rolled to a slow stop directly in front of the white tent-lined lawn, followed closely by a second vehicle, both engines idling in a low hum. Officer Perez, tall and deliberate in his movements, stepped out on the driver's side, scanning the scene with an experienced eye, while Officer Collins emerged from the passenger side, his gaze moving from the orderly rows of chairs to the softly playing quartet in the corner, to the neatly dressed guests who had paused mid-conversation to watch. Neither officer saw any evidence of the chaos Gregory had described in his call, but their training dictated neutrality until facts were established. Gregory wasted no time closing the distance, waving his free hand and motioning them toward him, as if he were the one in charge. "Officers, thank God you're here," he began, the urgency in his voice tinged with satisfaction. "This so-called wedding has been terrorizing our neighborhood for hours. Noise violations, blocked driveways, public disturbance, the whole circus." He gestured dramatically toward the reception area, ignoring the fact that the string quartet's gentle notes barely rose above the ambient hum of a summer afternoon. Perez's eyes flicked to Collins, a silent exchange passing between them as they took in the scene. White linens on neatly arranged tables, crystal glasses catching the sunlight, servers moving with quiet efficiency, guests chatting in low tones, and a bride and groom who stood calmly at the edge of the crowd. It looked more like a high-end magazine shoot than a public disturbance. "Sir, this appears to be a private wedding ceremony," Collins said evenly, his voice professional, neither confrontational nor indulgent. "What specifically is the disturbance?" Gregory pivoted his phone so the officers could see his live stream audience, the number of viewers now ticking past 1,100. "Look at this invasion," he told both them and his online followers, his voice dripping with disdain. "They've turned our quiet residential street into some kind of urban block party." Behind him, Tyrell's Instagram live continued to swell, the comments now coming so fast they were impossible to read without pausing the stream. "He called the cops for this? Someone send this to the news." Hashtag Brookside Wedding trending right now. The TikTok videos had already been shared by several local influencers, their captions framing Gregory's behavior as textbook harassment. The officers, though aware they were being filmed from multiple angles, kept their focus on procedure. "Sir, we'll need to speak to the event organizer," Perez said, his gaze shifting toward Maya, whose poise seemed only to solidify under the weight of the moment. She stepped forward, Ethan beside her, offering a calm smile to the officers. "Good afternoon, officers. I understand there's been a complaint. We have all the required permits, and the event is fully in compliance with city regulations." She produced a thick folder from a nearby table, the pages inside neatly tabbed and color-coded. Gregory scoffed loudly, stepping into the exchange. Permitted by who? Her friend down at City Hall? These documents could be fake, for all we know. Perez took the folder without comment, flipping through the contents, as Collins removed a small decibel meter from his belt. He glanced toward the quartet and took a reading. "Current noise level is 61 decibels, Collins announced. "City ordinance allows up to 75 on weekends until 10 p.m. The numbers were clear, but Gregory dismissed them with a wave. "Numbers don't matter when the character of our neighborhood is at stake," he insisted, his voice louder now, feeding on his own indignation. Across the street, more neighbors had gathered, some curious, some supportive of the couple, others still uncertain. Phones were out everywhere, some openly recording, others held discreetly at waist level. The hashtag Brookside Wedding was now climbing into the regional trending list on Twitter, boosted by short clips showing Gregory's earlier bouquet toss and his champagne table destruction, paired with captions like "the man who hated love" and "neighbor from hell meets his match." The visual narrative taking shape online bore little resemblance to the one Gregory was trying to sell. Perez handed the folder back to Maya with a nod that conveyed the documents were in order. "We'll need to verify these through the proper channels," he said, keeping his tone neutral for the benefit of the cameras. "But everything here appears professional and organized." Gregory's jaw tightened, and he turned his phone back toward himself. "You see what's happening, folks? They're siding with them. This is how standards slip." Tyrell caught the line perfectly. His camera zoomed in just enough to see the tension tightening the corners of Gregory's mouth. Collins, still holding the decibel meter, took another reading closer to the edge of the tent. Same, 61. "Well within the limit," he confirmed. The factual clarity seemed to only inflame Gregory further. "This isn't about a number on a meter," he barked. "It's about who we let in, about protecting our investments, about keeping this place safe from turning into—" He stopped himself just short of a word that might have crossed the line entirely, but the implication hung in the humid air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others stared him down. Maya didn't flinch. "Officers, we'd like to proceed with our ceremony. This is a private family event, and I'd hate for my guests to be delayed any longer." Perez nodded slowly, glancing back at Gregory. "Sir, unless you have evidence of an actual ordinance violation, we won't be shutting down this event." Gregory's lips moved as if to argue, but Collins was already noting the incident details into his notepad, his posture making it clear the assessment was nearly complete. His tone was dripping with the kind of certainty that comes from talking to an audience you believe will agree with you no matter what. Maya remained still, her eyes steady on Perez, not taking Gregory's bait. "Officers," she said evenly, "there's a simple way to clear up any confusion." She set the folder down on the nearest table, unbuttoned her tailored cream coat, and slipped it from her shoulders in one smooth motion. Conversations around them quieted as she folded it neatly over her arm, revealing the fitted white dress shirt beneath, its collar embroidered with a small but unmistakable emblem in metallic gold thread, the official seal of the city of Brookside. The sunlight caught the threads, making them glint just enough to draw the attention of every camera pointed her way. Perez's gaze dropped the seal, and in that instant his entire demeanor shifted. The casual professionalism in his stance straightened into something more formal. Collins glanced at his partner, then at Maya, then back at the emblem, his brows lifting slightly as if confirming to himself that he was seeing exactly what he thought he was seeing. Maya reached calmly into the inner pocket of her coat, pulled out a slim black leather wallet, and flipped it open with practiced ease. She held out a laminated ID card that bore her photograph, her full name, the city seal, and the title that suddenly reframed everything happening on Maple Court. Mayor, City of Brookside. Collins took the card first, studying it closely. His eyes moved over the holographic security strip, the embossed lettering, the expiration date. When he handed it to Perez, the senior officer looked from a card to Maya and back again before stepping back half a pace, his posture straightening to a crisp formality. His voice was clear and carried easily across the stunned crowd. "Good afternoon, Madam Mayor." The words hit the street like the crack of a gavel. Tyrell's live stream chat exploded instantly, a scrolling blur of capital letters and emojis. "Wait, she's the mayor? Plot twist of the year. Greg just called the cops on the mayor's wedding. I'm screaming." Gregory froze, his hand lowering the phone involuntarily as his mind scrambled to reconcile what he had just heard. "Madam what?" His voice cracked on the second syllable, the confident rhythm of his earlier tirades suddenly gone. Maya accepted her ID back from Perez and placed it carefully in her coat pocket, before turning her gaze to Gregory. "We've actually met before, Mr. Langford," she said in the same calm tone she had maintained throughout the encounter. "At the spring community budget meeting last year, and again when you addressed the council about noise ordinances." Her voice carried no mockery, no heat, just the unshakable steadiness of someone who had no reason to raise it. Phones caught every microexpression on Gregory's face as the reality settled in. The brief widening of the eyes, the tight swallow, the way his jaw clenched as he glanced around and realized every neighbor, every guest, and several hundred strangers online were witnessing the exact moment he understood who he had been publicly berating for the past 20 minutes. The viewer count on Tyrell's live stream climbed past 2,000. TikTok clips under #BrooksideWedding were racking up tens of thousands of views, with captions like "This is better than TV" and "Local man speedruns social suicide." Colin stepped slightly forward, his notepad still in hand, but now held loosely. "Madam Mayor, we were responding to a complaint. We'll, of course, ensure there's no further disruption to your event." The use of her title again, spoken in that measured police cadence, drew more stares. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson, who had earlier seemed ready to side with Gregory, lowered her phone and took a small step back toward her porch. Even those who had shared Gregory's posts on the neighborhood app were suddenly scrolling furiously, deleting comments that might age poorly. Gregory attempted to recover, forcing a tight, brittle smile for his camera. "Well, I didn't realize, I wasn't aware this was your..." Maya cut in gently, her voice still cool. "My wedding, yes. And I assure you, it is entirely lawful. But even if it weren't, Mr. Langford, the way you've approached this situation says a great deal more than any ordinance could." Her words weren't loud, but they landed heavily, the kind of statement that people would remember later when replaying the footage online. Perez returned her ID with a nod of respect. "Everything appears in order, Madam Mayor. Would you like us to remain for the duration of the ceremony?" She shook her head slightly. "Thank you, officers. I believe the matter is resolved, unless Mr. Langford has further evidence to present." All eyes turned to Gregory. The phone in his hand suddenly felt heavier, his live audience now a liability rather than an ally. He forced a chuckle that didn't quite mask the strain in his voice. "No, I think we've cleared things up." The quartet's music swelled slightly as if to underscore the moment, its elegant notes weaving back into the air now charged with a different kind of energy. Guests began murmuring again, this time with a ripple of amusement and relief. Tyrell's stream viewers flooded the chat with messages urging him to stay live for the rest of the wedding. Clips of Gregory's stunned reaction were already being cut and reposted with headlines like "How to End Your Own Reputation in Under 20 Minutes." The #hashtag Brookside Wedding climbed out of the regional trending list and into statewide visibility, drawing the attention of local newsrooms that thrived on the kind of made-for-TV spectacle now playing out in real time. It took less than 10 minutes for the first unmarked sedan with a roof-mounted camera to turn onto the street, followed closely by a van bearing the blue and white logo of Channel 7. The crew barely had time to hop out before Channel 4's van pulled up behind them, and in minutes the quiet cul-de-sac was clogged with tripods, sound technicians, and reporters already filming their live stand-ups against the backdrop of the immaculate wedding setup. The surreal contrast between the perfectly arranged reception tables and the awkwardly retreating figure of Gregory Langford was irresistible to every lens on the scene. Maya, aware that she was now speaking not just to her guests, but to an exponentially larger audience beyond the cameras, stepped forward with the same calm precision she had displayed from the start. Her voice carried without strain, firm but devoid of malice, when she addressed the reporters who began peppering her with questions. "Since you're here," she said, "I think it's important for our community to understand the broader context." She turned slightly so the cameras could catch her profile, her hands resting lightly together in front of her, the glint of her wedding ring visible as she continued. "Mr. Langford's company, Langford Landscaping, has been a valued contractor for the city of Brookside for over a decade. They are currently responsible for multiple municipal projects totaling approximately $2.5 million in active contracts. Those projects include park maintenance, public building landscaping, and seasonal decorative installations throughout our community." Gregory, who had been attempting to blend into the background by stepping closer to his porch, flinched visibly at the mention of his company's name and its ties to city funding. The cameras pivoted toward him instinctively, catching the way his face tightened, the way his grip on his phone shifted, as if he suddenly realized it was no longer a tool for offense, but a record of his own undoing. Maya let the implication hang just long enough before adding, "As mayor, I have always believed in holding our vendors to the highest professional and ethical standards." Today's events are not just about one wedding or one disagreement between neighbors. They are about whether the people we trust with public resources reflect the values of respect and inclusion that define Brookside. The soundbite was perfect, measured, direct, impossible to twist without losing its essence. Within minutes, local outlets were running the clip on their websites, and national aggregation sites were beginning to pick it up. Comments poured into Facebook community groups and Twitter threads, many expressing disbelief that a city contractor would engage in such behavior, especially toward the mayor. Others were less surprised, pointing out past incidents where Gregory's comments on the neighborhood app had skirted the edge of overt prejudice. The compilation videos forming on TikTok were merciless. One particularly popular edit spliced Gregory's earlier ghetto block party comment with the moment he realized Maya was the mayor, overlaying the freeze frame with the text career speedrun, 20 minutes to self-destruct. While the news crews captured reactions from guests and neighbors, the secondary wave of damage was already underway online. Yelp reviews for Langford Landscaping, which had sat comfortably at 4.6 stars that morning, began plummeting as dozens of one-star ratings flooded in, each referencing the wedding incident in blunt, often mocking terms. If you want landscaping done by someone who trashes weddings, calls the cops on his own mayor, and spouts racist garbage, Greg's your guy, read one. Another simply said, "They cut lawns like they cut community trust, sloppy and careless." Google reviews followed the same trajectory, the company's average dropping by half a star in the first hour and continuing to fall as links to the live footage circulated. Gregory's phone began vibrating incessantly in his pocket, calls from his office manager, from longtime clients, from his wife who had been at her sister's in the next town and was now demanding to know why her husband's face was plastered all over social media with captions like the mayor's worst neighbor. He ignored them, trying to keep his expression neutral for the cameras, but the color in his face betrayed the pressure building beneath the surface. Every attempt to step away from the cluster of reporters was shadowed by a boom mic or a phone camera, catching his muttered refusals and terse no-comment responses. Maya, meanwhile, returned to Ethan's side, her composure intact, the murmur of supportive voices from guests wrapping around her like a shield. Several shook their heads in disbelief. Others hugged her briefly before turning their own phones on the reporters, capturing the coverage from a second perspective. The mood among the guests shifted from outrage to a kind of rallying solidarity, the knowledge that they were witnessing a turning point in their community dynamics, sinking in with each passing minute. The quartet resumed playing softly, their music a deliberate act of reclaiming the event's original tone. By the time the third news van arrived, accompanied by an independent live stream journalist with over 200,000 YouTube subscribers, the narrative was already beyond Gregory's control. Clips of him tossing the bouquet, tipping the champagne table, and making his most inflammatory remarks had been stitched together with graphics highlighting his company's municipal contract amounts, a visual that required no commentary to convey the stakes. One enterprising guest with a marketing background had even started a Twitter thread compiling every known instance of Gregory posting inflammatory content on the neighborhood app, linking screenshots to his business profile. The thread was going viral in tandem with the wedding coverage. And yet, Maya refrained from gloating, her focus squarely on proceeding with her wedding despite the circus that had unfolded around it. She and Ethan quietly conferred with Perez and Collins, confirming that the police presence would remain only as long as necessary to ensure no further disruptions. The officers, now fully aware of the optics, maintained a respectful distance, their cars repositioned to keep camera crews from encroaching too far into the reception area. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. the law literally standing guard over the couple's right to celebrate in peace. The Channel 7 microphone hovered near her, followed by the boom mics from Channel 4 and the independent live streamer. But Maya spoke not for the headlines, they would take care of themselves, but for the record, for the community, and for the standards she had sworn to uphold. She clasped her hands in front of her voice calm, but with a steel thread woven through every word. As the mayor of Brookside, I have the responsibility to ensure that the businesses we partner with, especially those entrusted with public resources, conduct themselves in a manner consistent with our values of professionalism, respect, and inclusivity. Her eyes moved to Gregory, who stood near his porch, his shoulders stiffening as the cameras followed her gaze. Langford Landscaping currently holds active municipal contracts totaling over $2.5 million. Those contracts are not entitlements. They are agreements bound by performance standards and ethical clauses, clauses that require our vendors to demonstrate community respect at all times. A murmur rippled through the crowd at the word clauses, a word that carried the weight of written law and enforceable consequences. Maya continued without raising her voice. Section 12.3.7 of our municipal vendor agreement states that any contractor engaging in discriminatory behavior, harassment, or conduct inconsistent with the values of this city may be subject to review, suspension, or termination of all active contracts. Gregory shifted his stance, his face tightening, his lips parting as if to interject, but he stopped when he realized every microphone within 20 feet had swung toward him, ready to capture his next word. Maya did not pause. What happened here today was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate and public display of conduct that raises serious questions about whether Mr. Langford's company can continue representing this community as a partner. Gasps and murmurs overlapped in the humid air as the significance settled in. Guests exchanged glances, neighbors glanced toward the reporters, and the live stream chats exploded with capital letters and strings of exclamation points. One commenter typed, "She's putting him on notice live. This is legendary." Another posted, "Greg, buddy, log off before you make it worse." Gregory's phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he ignored it, his jaw locked as Maya's words framed the situation not as a personal dispute, but as an official matter with contractual teeth. She shifted slightly so that the cameras caught both her and the officers behind her. Pursuant to these clauses, I am announcing that a public contractor review hearing will be convened in our City Council chambers this coming Tuesday at 9 a.m. At that hearing, Mr. Langford will have the opportunity to present his account of today's events, and community members will be able to provide testimony regarding whether Langford Landscaping should continue holding municipal contracts. She let the details hang in the air for a moment before adding, "The hearing will be live-streamed for transparency." The phrase "live-streamed for transparency" was like fuel to the digital fire already burning online. Tyrell's viewer count surged again, comments flooding in with people vowing to watch. Local Facebook groups began posting about organizing attendance at the hearing. Gregory's voice broke through, louder now but edged with a defensive tremor. "This is my livelihood you're talking about. You can't just—" Maya turned to him without raising her tone. "Mr. Langford, I am not deciding the outcome today. I am ensuring due process is followed. That process begins with evidence." She nodded toward Officers Perez and Collins. "The Brookside Police Department will compile a complete report of today's incident, including all witness statements, video evidence, and any relevant communication logs." Perez, who had been quietly speaking with a pair of guests holding phones, stepped forward. "We've already begun collecting recorded footage from multiple sources," he said for the record. "We will also retrieve posts and comments from the neighborhood app, as well as the 911 call recording, to include in the report." Collins added, "We'll speak with everyone who was present and ensure the documentation is complete for the hearing." The procedural language had a sobering effect, grounding the moment in the machinery of municipal accountability. This was no longer an argument between two residents. It was an administrative process that could strip Gregory's company of its largest revenue stream. His shoulders seemed to sag under the weight of it, though his chin lifted stubbornly as if to hold on to the last thread of defiance. Maya turned back to the guests and the cameras. Brookside is a community that thrives because of the trust between its people and its institutions. When that trust is violated, whether by a neighbor, a business, or an official, we address it directly and transparently. We don't hide behind excuses, and we don't let prejudice dictate our interactions. Her voice carried a measured authority that made even the most cynical listeners understand she was not speaking in platitudes. The words were meant to be remembered. From the back of the crowd, someone began clapping softly, and within moments, the applause grew, mingling with the clicking shutters of news photographers. Gregory glanced toward the sound, his expression twisting at the realization that even some who had supported him earlier were now applauding the mayor's stance. In the digital space, the effect was even more pronounced. Hashtags like #accountability in Brookside and #vendor standards joined #Brookside wedding in the trending lists, each carrying clips of Maya's announcement paired with captions lauding her composure. The officers resumed speaking quietly with guests, noting names, collecting video files via airdrop, and requesting contact information for formal statements. A uniformed sergeant from the 2nd Patrol Car conferred briefly with Perez, then approached Maya to confirm the department's coordination with the city attorney's office. The presence of the sergeant underscored the seriousness of the matter. This was an incident now tied to both municipal governance and law enforcement documentation. Gregory took a step toward the reporters, perhaps to salvage something, but a chorus of shouted questions. Do you stand by your comments? Do you regret what you said? Will you apologize to the mayor? Halted him in place. His mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting from one camera to another. The risk of saying the wrong thing on record was too great, and so he simply turned back toward his house, the cameras tracking him like predators following wounded prey. Maya gave a final nod to the officers and to a few key guests, then turned toward Ethan, her expression softening just enough to remind everyone this was still her wedding day. "Shall we try again?" she murmured, and he gave a faint smile, though the awareness that the day had permanently shifted from celebration to civic theater lingered between them. The officers remained at the periphery, the media crews stayed put, and the guests returned to their tables. But the undercurrent of the hearing's announcement thrummed through every conversation. Inside the chamber, the council had added extra chairs along the walls, though even that could not contain the crowd. The hearing's live stream counter ticked past 2,000 before the gavel even sounded. Maya sat at the raised dais alongside the other council members, her expression neutral yet focused. She had recused herself from voting on the matter, in accordance with protocol, but as mayor, her role was still to preside over the proceedings, maintain order, and ensure every voice was heard. At the long table facing the council sat Gregory Langford and his attorney, a thin man in a gray suit who kept shuffling papers with an almost compulsive precision. Gregory himself looked markedly different from the defiant figure who had stood on his driveway days earlier. He wore a dark blue suit, a conservative tie, and the expression of someone who had spent the last 72 hours reckoning with consequences. His phone was nowhere in sight. The city clerk read the agenda item into the record, detailing the contracts Langford Landscaping currently held, the vendor conduct clauses at issue, and a brief summary of the complaint that had triggered the review. The words publicly documented discriminatory remarks echoed in the chamber, the phrase chosen carefully to be factual without being inflammatory. The clerk concluded by noting the dozens of video submissions, hundreds of public comments, and witness statements gathered by the police. The council's deputy mayor, Catherine Jenkins, took over as chair for the hearing. "We are here to determine whether Langford Landscaping will retain its contracts with the city of Brookside, and if so, under what conditions," she said, her voice even but firm. "We will hear from community members, review the evidence, and allow Mr. Langford to respond. This proceeding is recorded and live-streamed for transparency." The first speaker was an elderly resident named Mrs. Hargrove, who had lived in Brookside for 45 years. She approached the podium slowly, but spoke with steady clarity. "I was not at the wedding," she began, "but I watched the footage. What I saw was not just a neighbor losing his temper. I saw prejudice, the kind that erodes the foundation of community trust. She urged the council to terminate Gregory's contracts outright, concluding with, "If this is how he treats his own mayor, how can we expect him to treat the rest of us fairly?" Applause broke out in pockets of the chamber until Jenkins tapped the gavel to restore order. Next came a younger man named Alex Nguyen, who described hiring Langford Landscaping for a private project 2 years ago. "The work was excellent," he said, "and I never saw any behavior like what's in those videos. I'm not here to excuse what happened. I just think one bad day, even an awful one, shouldn't erase a lifetime of good work if the person is willing to make it right." His call for measured judgment drew nods from some and stony silence from others. Speaker after speaker took their turn. Some recounted their own experiences with Gregory's dismissive or exclusionary comments in the past, painting a picture of a pattern rather than an isolated lapse. Others, including a few long-term clients, vouched for his professionalism on the job and argued for rehabilitation over punishment. The live stream chat reflected the same divide, half the comments calling for contract termination, half debating the merits of giving him a second chance under strict oversight. When it was his turn, Gregory rose from his seat, smoothing the front of his jacket as he approached the podium. His attorney remained seated, hands folded, watching intently. Gregory cleared his throat, his voice quieter than the one that had barked across Maple Court. "Madam Deputy Mayor, members of the council, residents of Brookside," he began. "I stand here today ashamed of my actions and my words. I disrespected my neighbors, my community, and myself. I let anger and prejudice dictate my behavior, and I failed to live up to the standards my position as a city contractor demands." He paused, his gaze scanning the room, landing briefly on Maya before continuing. "I will not make excuses. I can only apologize and commit to doing the work required to rebuild trust." It was a concise statement, devoid of the defensiveness that had clung to him days earlier. His attorney followed with a brief outline of corrective measures Gregory was prepared to undertake voluntarily, including diversity training, community service, and regular reporting to the city on compliance with conduct clauses. Jenkins thanked him and called for the council's deliberation. The members leaned in toward one another, exchanging notes, glancing occasionally at the thick binders of evidence. The deliberation lasted just over 20 minutes, but the weight of it pressed on every second. The live stream audience ballooned past 3,000 as viewers sensed the decision was near. When the council members straightened in their chairs, Jenkins lifted her microphone. After reviewing the evidence, hearing from the public, and considering the statements of Mr. Langford and his counsel, the council has reached its decision. She looked down briefly at her notes before continuing. Langford Landscaping will retain its contracts with the City of Brookside under probationary status for 18 months. During this probation, Mr. Langford is required to complete 40 hours of cultural competency training from a provider approved by the city, submit quarterly diversity and inclusion reports, and perform 100 hours of community service at the Brookside Community Center. Any further violations of the vendor conduct clauses during this period will result in immediate termination of all municipal contracts. The gavel struck once to signify the decision. The room reacted in a mix of relief, disappointment, and cautious approval. Some residents applauded the balanced approach, others muttered about leniency, but no one could deny that the terms were strict. Maya, still silent in her role as presiding official, allowed herself a single small nod, an acknowledgement that the process had worked as it was designed to, delivering both accountability and an avenue for redemption. Gregory's shoulders eased fractionally, though the gravity of his probation was evident in his expression. He shook his attorney's hand, then approached the podium once more. "Thank you," he said simply. "I will meet these conditions, and I will earn back your trust." It was not a flourish, but the sincerity in his tone was enough to quiet the room for a moment. The cameras captured it all, ensuring that his promise would live online alongside the footage of his offense, a constant reminder of the work ahead. At first, he carried out the requirements with a mechanical detachment, attending the scheduled cultural competency sessions, as if they were items to be checked off a list rather than opportunities for genuine growth. The training sessions were held in a modest but well-lit conference room at the Brookside Community Center, where a facilitator named Alicia Ruiz, an articulate woman with years of experience in diversity education, began each meeting with ground rules about listening, empathy, and the acknowledgement of bias. Gregory often sat with his arms crossed in the early sessions, his contributions limited to short, cautious answers when called upon. But as the weeks went by and he listened to the stories of others, an immigrant small business owner detailing the barriers she faced securing loans, a retired teacher describing decades of coded exclusion in housing policies, a young black contractor recounting the subtle but costly ways assumptions undermined his bids, he began to recognize pieces of himself in the narratives, and not in the way that brought pride. The community service component of his probation placed him in direct contact with residents he had never interacted with before. His 100 hours were split between maintaining public gardens in Brookside's diverse East Ward and helping with after-school programs at the same community center hosting his training. The first time he showed up for garden duty, tools in hand, a group of volunteers greeted him politely but without warmth, their knowledge of his recent infamy evident in the guarded way they asked questions about his planting preferences. Over time, however, familiarity began to replace suspicion. They saw him return week after week, not just fulfilling hours, but actually learning about native plant care, asking for input on seasonal flower rotations, and sharing tips from his years in landscaping. In the after-school program, he helped supervise the sports field and assisted with setting up art projects, the awkwardness of his first few afternoons giving way to a rhythm of small human moments, laughing with a group of 10-year-olds over a crooked kickball pitch, encouraging a shy child to finish a watercolor painting, fixing a wobbly easel before anyone else noticed. His business also began to reflect the shift. One of the quarterly diversity reports required by the council stipulated not only tracking hiring, but actively recruiting from underrepresented groups in the local workforce. At first, Gregory resisted the idea, insisting to his operations manager that quality came first. But after a few frank conversations with Alicia during training and a nudge from a fellow contractor who had successfully diversified his crew, Gregory began posting job listings in new venues, community bulletin boards, local cultural centers, and online groups that served minority-owned business networks. Within 2 months, Langford Landscaping had hired 2 new employees. Carlos Mendez, a meticulous groundskeeper with a reputation for precision trimming, and Patrice Holmes, a design-savvy horticulturist whose portfolio of public park layouts impressed even Gregory. Their work quickly proved to be among the most consistent and creative in the company, challenging his long-held assumption that reaching beyond his usual hiring circles meant compromising standards. Outside of the formal requirements, small shifts began to ripple into his interactions around the neighborhood. The first time Gregory saw Maya again after the hearing was at the monthly Brookside Cleanup Day, an event that gathered volunteers from every ward to collect litter, prune shrubs, and repair park fixtures. She was there in jeans and a city volunteer shirt, working alongside other residents to paint the gazebo railings in Memorial Park. When he approached with a nod and a tentative morning, Mayor, she looked up, paused just long enough to acknowledge the weight of the moment, and replied simply, "Good morning, Greg. Glad you could join us." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it wasn't dismissal either. Over the next few months, they crossed paths at similar events, their conversations limited but civil, occasionally touching on landscaping updates or upcoming community initiatives. Each time, the exchanges felt less like public performances and more like genuine, if cautious, neighborly contact. The probation terms required quarterly check-ins with the Vendor Oversight Committee, meetings Gregory had dreaded initially but grew to approach with quiet confidence as he accumulated tangible improvements to report. By the second review, he could point to increased employee diversity, consistent positive feedback from the East Ward garden coordinators, and the completion of 35 community service hours without a single complaint. The committee noted the progress, commended his detailed reporting, and encouraged him to continue integrating the training lessons into company policy. Even in the less forgiving arena of public opinion, subtle changes began to emerge. While his online reviews had plummeted in the immediate aftermath of the wedding incident, a handful of newer entries began appearing that spoke not to the scandal, but to the quality of recent work. "They did my front yard this month. Beautiful job. And the crew was friendly and professional," read one. Another mentioned seeing Gregory personally working alongside his staff on a public flower installation, praising his hands-on approach. They were small victories, but each represented a shift in narrative, from the man who embarrassed himself at the mayor's wedding to the contractor making an effort to improve. The true test came during the Fall Festival in Brookside Central Square, a yearly event Gregory's company had traditionally bid on for decorative installation. Under the scrutiny of probation, he still won the contract, his proposal bolstered by Patrice's vibrant design plan. The festival debuted with towering arrangements of chrysanthemums, intricate corn husk sculptures, and a pumpkin-lined archway that became the most photographed spot of the event. Maya attended the opening and, when interviewed by a reporter, commented, "It's important to recognize improvement when it's genuine. These displays are beautiful, and they reflect the effort being made to align with our community's values." For Gregory, hearing her acknowledge his progress publicly felt like an inflection point, not absolution, but a step toward mutual respect. The vendor probation system, strengthened after Gregory's case, became a model other municipalities adopted, complete with required diversity metrics, public reporting, and community service integration. By the second year of his probation, Gregory had not only met every requirement, but had begun exceeding them, continuing his cultural competency training voluntarily, expanding his recruitment network, and instituting a mentorship program for young landscapers from underrepresented backgrounds who were interested in municipal contract work. This program, dubbed Green Futures, paired seasoned crew leaders with high school and trade school students, offering them paid internships and the chance to work on high-visibility projects like the Memorial Park Winter Lights display or the seasonal floral installations along Main Street. The work did more than improve Gregory's company's public image. It earned tangible recognition. In his third year, Langford Landscaping received the Regional Diversity Excellence Award from the State Municipal Contractors Association, an accolade that was covered not just in trade publications, but in the local press, where reporters reminded readers of how far the company had come since the viral wedding incident. The acceptance speech Gregory gave at the award luncheon was concise but deliberate, crediting his team, the oversight committee, and even the city council for holding him accountable. "We can't change what we refuse to face," he said to a roomful of contractors and city officials. "Brookside gave me the chance to face myself, and I'm grateful for it." Meanwhile, Brookside itself had been quietly amassing a reputation as a community where inclusivity was more than a slogan. The city's Welcome Initiative, launched in the months after the wedding incident, expanded into a multi-pronged program that included quarterly good neighbor recognitions, language access services at public meetings, and a restructured neighborhood app that required verified identities and monitored posts for discriminatory content. The app, once a breeding ground for anonymous grumbling and coded hostility, had transformed into a hub for legitimate updates, service announcements, and constructive dialogue. That transformation alone became a case study cited in governance seminars at regional universities. Maya and Ethan, still balancing their respective careers, hers in city leadership, his in architectural design, found that their own anniversary had become a symbolic date for the broader community. On the first anniversary of the wedding, they hosted a modest gathering at Memorial Park, inviting the guests from their original ceremony along with neighbors from all wards. The event, a simple picnic with live music, drew more than 100 people and was informally dubbed Unity Day by one of the local newspapers. The following year, the Parks Department, with Gregory's company providing the landscaping and logistical setup, officially adopted the name and expanded the program, adding booths for local businesses, performances from school bands, and a volunteer fair. By the third Unity Day, attendance had swelled to over 400, with residents lining up for food trucks, children playing lawn games, and a central stage hosting speeches, cultural showcases, and musical performances representing the city's diverse population. Gregory's role in Unity Day evolved alongside the event. In the first year, he worked quietly in the background, ensuring the grounds were immaculate and the floral arrangements, designed by Patrice, framed the park's entrance. By the second year, Maya invited him to join the volunteer recognition ceremony, where he received a plaque for his contributions to the community center gardens. By the third year, he was one of the event's key coordinators, overseeing a team of volunteers from his Green Futures program and personally greeting attendees at the entrance. The significance of his visible presence at an event celebrating unity was not lost on anyone, and while some still viewed him through the lens of his past mistakes, the prevailing sentiment had shifted toward cautious respect. National attention followed in measured waves. The National Municipal League designated Brookside as its model-inclusive community. In its annual rankings, citing the city's vendor accountability program, its revitalized public engagement platforms, and the tangible results of its inclusivity initiatives. Maya accepted the designation at a ceremony in Chicago, accompanied by Deputy Mayor Jenkins, the city attorney, and a small delegation that included Gregory and two of his young men. Photos of the group, smiling, diverse, and clearly collaborative, circulated online alongside articles tracing the city's journey from a viral embarrassment to a benchmark for others to emulate. The local economy benefited in ways that even the most optimistic early reformers hadn't predicted. Property values rose steadily, bolstered not only by the improved perception of the city, but also by the physical beautification projects that had multiplied in recent years. Gregory's crews were contracted for many of them, from refurbishing neglected park corners into usable green spaces to designing inclusive playgrounds with accessible equipment. Each project bore a small plaque crediting the contractor, and while some saw it as savvy branding, others saw it as a subtle, ongoing record of accountability, the visible proof that people and companies could change when given the chance and the incentive. Within the community, the memory of the wedding confrontation had not disappeared, but it had been reframed. It was no longer just a story about a neighbor's prejudice. It was the origin point of a series of changes that touched nearly every corner of civic life. School civics classes used it as a case study in conflict resolution and the importance of civic engagement. New residents heard about it within weeks of moving in, not as gossip, but as a story of how their city had chosen a path of reform over retribution. Even the neighborhood app, once the stage for the initial escalation, now featured annual reminders about Unity Day and volunteer opportunities, often posted by Gregory himself. The personal dynamic between Gregory and Maya, while not one of close friendship, had shifted into one of professional respect. They worked together on several municipal projects, their interactions marked by polite efficiency and the occasional shared smile when a meeting ran long or a volunteer event went particularly well. There was an understanding between them that neither had sought this connection, but both had chosen to navigate it with the same commitment they brought to the city's well-being. Ethan, for his part, often spoke publicly about the importance of not letting that day define their lives, framing it instead as the start of something unexpectedly constructive. Years later, the day that had begun as a disruption to Maya and Ethan's wedding had become one of the most referenced real-life examples in civic leadership seminars and community building workshops across the country. In classrooms, instructors played the unedited footage of the confrontation, pausing to discuss body language, verbal restraint, and the importance of staying calm under intense provocation. Municipal training programs integrated the incident into their curriculum, not as a sensational story, but as a living lesson in how elected leaders could turn hostility into dialogue without diminishing accountability. Maya herself often accepted invitations to speak at universities, where she shared not only the timeline of events, but also the inner resolve it took to keep her composure when the easier path might have been anger or retaliation. Gregory, too, became an unexpected voice in these discussions. Once defensive and dismissive, he now stood at podiums describing the slow, uncomfortable work of unlearning prejudice and earning back trust. He spoke plainly about the sting of public shame, the long road of community service, and the day he realized that his business and reputation would only survive if he chose genuine reform over hollow apologies. Over time, their shared appearances shifted the tone from opposite sides to partners in progress. The city implemented stronger anti-discrimination safeguards in vendor contracts, required cultural sensitivity training for all municipal partners, and created a community review board to mediate disputes before they escalated. Other towns began adopting similar measures, citing Brookside as proof that a crisis could plant the seeds of long-term unity. The annual Unity Day became the living embodiment of that change, a space where former adversaries greeted each other warmly, and where the story of the wedding incident was told not with bitterness, but as a reminder of how far they had come. Maya and Gregory often ended their talks the same way, by stressing that leadership wasn't about avoiding conflict entirely, but about handling it in a way that left a community stronger than before. The legacy of that summer afternoon endured not as a scandal, but as a blueprint for hope, showing that when accountability met opportunity, even the deepest divides could be bridged. The end. If this story left you thinking about how conflicts can change people and entire communities, I'd like to hear from you. Share your thoughts about the plot, what part struck you most, and what you think happened in the moments we didn't see. Tell me where you're watching from so we can see how far this message has traveled. If you want more stories that dig deep into human nature, resilience, and redemption, make sure you like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your comments and support help keep stories like this alive.